the lower levels. And so I'm working on a project called Pattern Journal, which is right now just a newsletter that I haven't published a single issue of yet. But eventually, I envision it being a protocol for global knowledge production that can be applied to local settings. And so I imagine the value flows there would be the patterns fitting in that kind of knowledge layer and being extremely useful in value flow protocols later on.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and by the way, you don't have to answer. I just wanted to know how to think about it for you guys. But so yeah, so you don't actually need the knowledge layer or the planning layer. If you're not doing that, you can just record what's going on economically, and that's worth something, but not nearly as much probably. Let's see where to start. So Brent, what were you gonna do here?
I could go back to the apples. I was just trying to grok that, but I think I stopped. I always got caught up in like I was thinking about proposals, and well, proposals have intents. So what's the difference between like an intent and a commitment? Because that goes into planning, right? Because like once you have the recipe,
yes,
you kind of map that over to you're composing recipes together. Is that right? And then you have you intend to do things, or you intended to offer like a resource, like a truck or a or I'll give you a bushel of apples for place to stay or something, or what? How did and there were like two different types of intents. There was like an intent that I think you can have a proposal that has like a proposed intent, so you can have multiple intents in a certain proposal, or you can have one intent by itself. I was a little bit confused by that, but
okay.
Maybe I should let me kind of maybe so people know about. We could go back to the Apple thing because I'm just speaking out loud.
Let me give you like a 1 minute just overview of the pieces of value flows. This might help. So you guys have all obviously looked at the 3 layers, right? So the knowledge layer is like anything that's like a type object, basically, or it's a recipe. And
let me get the picture.
Okay. So
trying to navigate your website.
Yeah, it's under specification. And then like it's under specification and then UML diagram or something like that.
That's an overview.
That's the gory detail one. If you want less gory detail, one of those introductory pages has the layers that without a lot of detail. I'm going to keep talking while Brent works on this. So the middle layer is called plan or planning. And it was where Brent was going with intents. It basically has the offers and requests kind of stage, and then it has the contractual, promised, committed kind of stage. You don't need both of those. It depends on what you're trying to do. So yes, so proposals and intents are just a structure to okay, so there's the simple view. And that doesn't, may not have quite enough detail, but that's okay, that's fine.
So
those,
yeah, so like in part, so this is the planning layer, and
Yep.
that's the recipe layer kind of thing, and then this is like once you have everything rolled up, you get in part one, and you actually go through the economic transaction. You're not, like planning to do it, you do it.
Yep. The observation layer is doing it, recording what you did.
Yeah, let me get back to do it though. Sorry.
Yeah, in my experience, the demarcation between knowledge, planning, and action are much more fuzzy than that.
Yeah, probably so. Hopefully value flows will accommodate some fuzziness there, but if you want to run through an example later on, we can certainly give it a shot.
Sure.
A
So
fuzzy
sorry,
example.
I'm still confused at how the layers work together.
Okay. So the layers actually all basically have the same patterns of information. The recipes, well, so on the knowledge layer, there's like type things, like there's resource specifications and process specifications and some agent stuff. Those are not strictly part of the recipe. Like if you didn't care anything about recipes, you'd still basically want that stuff. Resource specifications are um, kind of the definition of your resources, and resources defined quite broadly. It's it can be things, right? It can be services, it can be types of work, it can be ecological thing, it can be many anything that you want to think of in that way and keep track of in that way. Processes are about transforming stuff, making stuff, producing stuff, etc. And if you're gonna exchange or just give somebody something, you don't need a process because nothing really happened to the resource except for a change of right, you know. Um, and let's see, where was I going? Okay, so those are the basic pieces. The agent stuff, I don't know if you guys care that much about. That's just like relationships between people and people and people and organizations and it's like how you just it's a flexible way to structure your organizational being. Um, the recipe is um, like you don't need a recipe if you don't do the same thing twice. It's for repeatable processes. But if you do the same thing over and over, recipes are just really handy. They're just a way to save yourself a bunch of trouble planning the same thing over and over. Um, so that's that. And, the recipes have the same kind of flow, inputs, processes, outputs, and then exchanges going on. And that planning sort of has two stages going on because it's got the offers and requests pieces, which is proposal and intent, and then it's got the actual planning, which is the agreement, the process, and the commitments. And it's still the flow. It's still inputs, outputs, processes, and then the observation layer, the process lives across the layers. It's just still there. And then you have your actual inputs, your actual outputs, and your actual resources. And the actual resources know their resource specification. Not everything is going to have an actual resource. Like in a more detailed model, you'd see a line between economic event and resource specification because things like types of work, things that you don't like services, services, or just things that you don't even, if you don't care about inventorying anything, you won't have any actual economic resources. Those are there to give you a data structure to keep kind of current information about economic resources. And it's basically all also pretty derivable, like you can, if you had the bandwidth, you could just rerun all the events anytime you wanted to see a resource, but that gets pretty intense. So we put them in as a formal piece of the model. Let's see. Did that help? Those are the pieces.
Yeah, that helps. I think the observation layer is still a bit fuzzy for me, but I don't want to hog up all the time on that if people have other questions.
Doesn't matter to me. You can hog away if you want.
Yeah, one interesting insight is that there's no direct inclusion of financial elements inside of that diagram, which means that if you think of a world without money, you can actually run the whole system without money.
Yep.
I think is interesting. One of the things I have an issue with currency is that it doesn't actually encompass the entire value of a transaction. But I'd be curious to see if you think that this value flow fully encapsulates all of the layers on a transaction, up to and including the interpersonal and realization of value by the people who transact or participate in the transaction. Like, can you use this to also encompass the value that, like, I don't know, the hard to kind of think about things like I like this person, so I'll give them a deal, or I guess this gives me like this fundamentally fills my heart with joy, so I'll work for less to make sure this happens, or this is good for the community as a whole. That is the value of the proposition.
Oh boy, those are good questions. So starting kind of back on the currency thing. So currencies of any sort, credits and tokens and crypto and whatever are all economic resources. So yeah, you can, but you don't need them, right? You just don't need them. You can run an economy without them if you want. And value flows doesn't care because it's all resources. Things that are softer, like what you're talking about, may or may not be there. Like reputation is not necessarily in value flows. Although we could kind of see how you want to define it. One thing I didn't say so far is that all the flows, the commitments, the intents, the economic events, and the recipe flows, have something called an action, and the action defines what that flow is doing, basically, and how it affects resources. So, that's where you've got things like consume and produce, and that's where you have use, like you're using a piece of equipment or something, and that's where you have work. If you want to log, I just worked 5 hours on this as part of this process, that's that. There's also one called site, which starts to get to the question a little bit. So site, well, let me back up one more thing. Different actions imply different effects on resources. So if you produce something, you're either making a new economic resource or you're adding to an existing economic resource. Like I just made 100 more of this widget thing. If you consume, they're going to be gone. You're going to decrement. You're going to lose some of that resource or all of that resource. If you use something, it just is unavailable while you're using it. Otherwise, nothing happens to the resource. It's still there. If you cite something, also nothing happens to the resource, except maybe it gets more valuable if people who count citations. So that works for scientific things or, kind of standard citation kinds of academic things. But it's also just a way to say, I just made something, and while I was making it, Lawrence gave me this fabulous idea and it saved me a ton of time. I want to cite that idea
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that that he gets paid. If money's coming back down the pipe backwards, that contribution is acknowledged. Um, Now, you know, this person is my friend or something isn't quite that. You could probably make that happen in some way, but you know,
Yeah, I could see, I could almost see like using citing for like in adding you might be able to do a secondary non-consumable resource, or more like a fuzzy resource that has much more rapid, accelerated inflationary, deflationary properties. The way I've been looking at it or thinking about it is like as a social currency that has and like everybody has like a fiat social currency that they can basically create at will. And the value of it inflates and deflates based on the like an internal tally mark of like somebody does such and such for me. I think that they're doing good, but it doesn't have any actual. It has real impact, but it doesn't have real executable value. But it does help make decisions based on the relative value based on what type of accumulated favors and like intrinsic value it comes up with.
hmm
Um, so I almost think it might be the way I do it in this case. I basically set up as as a third or a secondary input from the monetary, physical goods and services, and then there's like a relational goods and services. There's an interesting concept about like the arm's length relationship in business, which I think is an interesting
hmm
concept because it asks the question: Can you make a economic um, environment that has no preconceptions of relationships between the parties? And I think that probably I don't really think it's been determined yet, but I'd probably say that's demonstrably false based on the reality of most business having a large impact on on externalities that aren't captured by the existing economic activity. I think it's interesting because it's a way of like abstracting out some of these these concepts, but then also creating a space for them to be examined separately. Because these usually get tied together in ways that people don't really have a good way of thinking about. It's usually like, oh, well, that's interesting, or that feels good, or I like that deal, or I hated that deal, or I don't feel like I'm getting what I'm paid, or what I'm worth, or all these hard to quantify feelings. Um, but yeah, so it does. I do like the citing mechanism for capturing part of this as a because citing is an inflationary concept because there's no way to
yeah,
decite something. So,
yeah. I feel like you could kind of make it work to kind of keep track of like value flows. It cares a lot more about. I mean, it's an economic model, so that's what it is. It like I feel like some of what you're talking about probably is off the edges of value flows somewhere. You could probably, on the other hand, there's a lot of like reputational data in value flows
mhm.
because you can see what you did, you can see what you helped with, you can see were you on time, you can see that kind of information. And part of what you talked about was that, wow, I've really helped a lot in this whatever. Um, so I don't know if that helps, but at some point you're gonna, like likes and claps and stuff aren't really part of the ontology, but could be easily added on. Like we've always, in fact, Brent, wasn't this your thing, reputation? And Jimmy always wanted a reputation added, and we kept saying, we don't know how to do reputation. It's not part. it's connected but not the same, and Brent will do it. Anyway.
I think you can't have reputation without identity, and that's like a whole ball of wax on its own. Like, I also didn't really see that in the value flow ontology. Maybe it's in there. I didn't quite get to it yet, but without identity.
Maybe I should have talked about that actually.
Oh, is it represented?
Well, it's represented sort of as in the world. It's not represented as in machine. It's not represented as in credentials or,
identifiers,
the ID or whatever.
Right.
So there's an agent. There's the REAA part is agent. Agent is a person or an organization, or more recently added, an ecological agent. Like if you want Lake Erie to be an agent, you can make it one, by God, and look at the inputs to it and the outputs, and give it some agency.
I've got a very
so there's that, but we don't have and then to me, a person has multiple sets of kind of machine related identity, credentials and those kinds of things. And that changes over time. So we've stayed away from convoluting those into one thing because we don't think they are one thing. Your responsibility as a person goes beyond, did you log that thing and using this ID or something?
So
I don't know.
Are agents ships of Theseus, or are they atomic?
What does that mean?
So a ship of Theseus is the concept that the ship that you start with over time gets replaced piece by piece, and is it the same ship that was at sail when it started or at the end did? And the question really is, like, an agent, like, let's say, a person is a good example, because like me 10 minutes ago versus me 10 years ago versus me 20 years from now, how do you keep track of or handle the both a personal growth and development, reputational inflation of past reputational events having no bearing on current economic activity, and more important, from a corporate sense, shell corporations and preventing fraud and preventing basically relying on a brand or a name more than the actual outputs of the economic event. And the short answer is that there's no easy way to do it. You can't rely on an agent being. Well, actually, I'd like to hear it before I go into my thoughts.
So in value flows, all of those U's are one agent over time. Organizationally, I mean, people sort of form, all the people who belong to an organization could change, and the organization would still have its same identity, if that's how we think of it, or or it's formalized or whatever. So, I mean, part of the agency thing is also responsibility and accountability and all that sort of stuff, without getting too crazy about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can also, in the world we live in, where most often your user credentials are how you are identified here and there and everywhere, and people don't tend to write apps that say, I'm this agent, and by the way, these are my credentials on this place. So that it gets convoluted a lot in actual technical land. But, for example, Holochain, and there was long discussions for a while because they call themselves agent centric. But what they mean by agent is so different than what we mean by agent. It was really confusing for a while because to them, an agent is basically a key pair. It's like your public key on this device. You know, the minute you have two devices, there's two agents, and um, because of the way they defined it, it was that it's not wrong. It's just a technical definition. This device has authority to do things over here in this network or something. Um, but anyway, so I don't know
Yeah.
if that at
I
least
mean,
answered it for value flows. I hear you. There's fuzz there.
yeah, I don't think there's a good. My personal view is that that agent creation, the way I solve it is that you have very easy agent creation and agent destruction. And that the idea is that over your lifetime, or you may have multiple agent identities based on your access to past characteristics, or past performances. But you have the right to basically go bankrupt, essentially, like socially bankrupt, at
Hmm.
your choice or at your discretion. And the idea is that, if you, for whatever, and this has both good and bad consequences, but this
Yeah,
allows,
totally.
if you're a bad actor, you can like abandon your past misdeeds and reinitialize yourself as a new actor, but then you go through the
Hmm.
same level of betting as you would go previously. But it
Yeah.
also allows redemption arcs, or redemption, for bad actors, and it creates an incentive to
Hmm.
basically maintain the value of identity as long as possible. So it also creates a well of like a universal basic income style, like, baseline access to resources, that you have to have available in the system to allow for people to create new accounts to feed into
Mm.
the system. But it'd be one of those things, like if you forget five passwords, then you may lose access to a portion of your identity or your agent identity. But you would be able to recover maybe a portion of that, or maybe a portion of the rights, and maybe transfer some of those resources back to another identity. Um,
Yeah.
I think there's a
Well,
lot to.
value flows. Sorry, go ahead.
I think when you get into, like, if you stop thinking about agents and identities as atomic, um, in non-changeable, units, but as like a collection of, like, snippets of definable time and measurable events, then I think it makes it a lot easier to think about agent identity.
Okay, but still, if you promise to help me this weekend, I want it to be you.
Not a
Just
collection of.
saying. Yeah,
I
not
mean,
like this other one that is going back, like this other.
if I
But
have
I hear you.
schizophrenia, I don't. But if I
What?
had schizophrenia and I have good days and bad days, or if I have mental breakdowns on good days and bad days, you could probably think of
Yeah.
me as a multiple agents who all have access to identity at different, access to different rights at different points in time, based on today, tomorrow, or the future.
Well,
Um,
I guess you could do that, and value flows wouldn't care.
yeah, yeah,
Although it doesn't have a way to tie agents together in that way, you'd have to create that piece of it. But
yeah. It'd
it
be
just wants to know who did stuff, who received stuff, who gave stuff, who
or which agent, or which
is
collection of
involved
rights.
in economic activity,
That could be interesting.
who promised something.
So value flows have no way of verifying agent identity, or
Nope,
agent
outside the
capability.
scope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
value flows doesn't think value flows. I'm not going to say it doesn't assume there's not a tech. There's a technical thing because it kind of does. I mean, its whole purpose is for software, but it's the definitions of the entities like agent aren't tied into that very much. they're all real world things that people care about, whether there's software or not.
Okay, well, I've talked a lot. I'm going to mute myself.
How about we go back to the observation layer fuzziness?
Yeah, specifically, I'm now kind of interested in like the recipes side of it and like the system dynamics of how recipes like work throughout all the layers, but also the observation layer, definitely. Yeah.
So let's see. You said you weren't clear about the observation layer, so I might need a more specific question.
Yeah.
It's basically what
could I say
you
something
observe
here?
has happened in. Go ahead, Brent.
Did I say something? In my notes, I separated out classes to part 1, part 2, and part 3. So part 3 was a recipe.
Yeah.
Don't know if this is right, but I got recipe process, recipe flow, recipe exchange, recipe resource, process. I don't know if process specification was supposed to be there. Maybe it was. Measure.
Yeah.
And action.
Yeah, measures live everywhere. Anywhere there's a quantity, it uses this measure from a different ontology. Anywhere there's a quantity with a unit. But yeah, that sounded, so some of those things go across layers and are sort of don't care about layers. They're sort of smaller elements, but basically.
Okay. And then
that sounded pretty right.
And then there's things like, in your example, like make dough. Essentially, you built up and you chained processes together to make pies, but it was pretty arbitrary, like how you, process specifications rather, because I guess you don't have process. You don't have a process. I guess you have a recipe process, but you don't have.
I do, yeah.
A process, really. That doesn't come until you actually make your pies and go through that. So, so does a recipe process also conform to a process specification?
Yes.
Okay, and a process specification is like, does that actually specify like different ingredients like the sugar and the butter and then the dough work?
Nope.
No, does not.
No, it's just it might have instructions for how to do something or how to make something.
Okay. So
basically it's a very simple thing. It's a type object that says making dough here and making dough here is the same basic process.
So what is like in like ontology world, or if you're gonna like write RDF, what's make dough like an instantiation of? Is it an instantiation of the
it
recipe
could be
process class? Yeah.
That's the name of a process specification or a process.
Okay.
Depending on.
It has in the make dough process, recipe process, has certain flows going in and certain flows going out. Like dough work, consume butter, consume water, consume pie tins, use a rolling pin. Those are all input recipe flows. And output recipe flows are things like produce the pie bottom and produce the pie top.
Yep.
Okay. Now
and that sort of applies at all the layers, right? That could be a plan, it could be a recipe, it could be what actually happened.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of as you use the words,
Sure, but the kind of classes sort of change their names as you move down.
Yeah, totally. The classes change their names, definitely.
But what's like what's stage and state? Like you have recipe flow, stages, process specification.
So stage is to accommodate processes that where the same resource goes both in and out of a process without changing its identity, like maybe fixing your car, or sometimes production processes are like that. Like we ran into, the first place we ran into that was with Guerrilla Translators, and they have these pretty set stages that they go through when they do translations. You know, they do the first translation, somebody edits it, somebody proofreads it, somebody formats it into a publication thing, whatever they are, you know. But you have to create the identity of that translation document pretty early on. You want to do that in its first stage. So when you do the first rough translation, or not so rough, whatever, you know, the output of that is the translated document. And then that goes into the edit process and comes out of the edit process. So when you have the same, or like QA is another good example, testing processes. So when it's the same identified resource, and in, you know, even though in a translation some words have changed and some whatever, you know, you sometimes need to know that. Like you need to say, you want to say, I want 5 of these parts, but they have to have been through QA. I don't want them if they haven't been through QA. So then the stage becomes sort of part it up. I don't use Discord for this ever, so I don't.
If you want, I could share my screen and you could tell me where to go.
Okay, well, let me give one shot at it because I might have it. Can you guys see that or not?
I can see Discord. You're sharing Discord, I think.
Oh, shoot.
But if you change your tab, maybe it'll...
I did. I changed my tab. I thought it would switch. It didn't switch. Let me see. Let me get the thing open separately also. Okay, well, I'll let y'all share. But this isn't working. Nobody sees the model, right?
No.
See anything.
But here, I'll share my screen. Hopefully, you might need to stop your share.
Let me do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So where do I go?
You go. Are you in value flows? Yeah. Go into specification, and then on the side it just says UML something.
UML diagram. Oh, do you see my screen? Or?
No.
You might have to click watch stream.
Let me hit watch
Discord.
Stream. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Yes, you're there. So
okay.
Then,
cool.
Like bring that thing up in its own tab or whatever because it's so teeny. Like to me, I do with a right click. I'm in, depending on what operating system you're using and stuff.
You just want it to be larger, or oh, I see this image.
See the image, yeah.
Yes, got it.
Okay, so this helps. Okay, pretty tiny to me, but I can talk about it because I know it's there.
Here we go. Recipes.
Okay, there you go. So right now, everything that starts with the word recipe is part of the recipe, but there's not a recipe object. I think we need one. This is part of the discussions with Robin. We need one so that we can do things like forking and versioning. But otherwise, you don't actually need one because they hang together in the same way that all of the input, process, output stuff hangs together, which is that if I have an input, I need to go look for some other recipe that has the output and make that and just hook it in, you know. So you can get a super long flow that's not even straight, you know. It could have many inputs for my one output, and all kinds of different trajectories and, you know, in a graph. But you can get a pretty complicated recipe out of just those, you know, the recipe flow, the recipe process, and then if you have exchanges mixed in. need the recipe exchange, but
the recipe is really just these 3 plus recipe exchange. That's kind of like the data model of a recipe.
yep.
Oh wait, sorry, it's not process specification.
It's really 2. It's just like recipe flow, recipe process, and recipe exchange, and then they need their type objects. So they need resource specification, and they need, you don't need process specification, but it's helpful for many things. You need resource specification because that's not anywhere else.
And so you could compose recipes somehow.
Yeah,
right. Out of other recipes.
Or it's more like hooking them together.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the way it works. Like right now, we're doing this. We're doing a project with. It's a textile network in New York, and they have. It's a supply chain thing. So they have got farmers. They've got scouring mills. They've got spinning mills, and then it goes to a knitting factory. It's like small batch thing. And they've got a bunch of designers who have banded together to do this so they can like make minimums and kind of coordinate that whole little ecosystem. It's like it's sheep and alpaca, that's what it is, and it's a big emphasis on sustainable farming and carbon capture and stuff. Anyway, so it's like this little scope of a network, and their recipes are like that. And it works. We're doing it right now. So they have like in those stages, and then there's some shipping stages in between there. There's maybe 20 recipes, but they all hook together to make one kind of conceptual recipe that's their whole basic seasonal plan. And I sort of keep wanting to, we've done models that have recipe in it, but we haven't actually needed it yet. And it sort of depends on how it hooks into the OKH, et cetera stuff.
Awesome. Thank you.
A lot of these seem like the value flows seem really tied to like business processes plans and logistics. Like in whenever you're doing like drop shipping or manufacturing, like logistics is like that umbrella term for like everything that happens once the product gets shipped to a factory or a warehouse, then has to get to a customer somehow.
And before that too, there's logistics all the way down.
Egypt.
Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
But it really feels like it's really tied to that, and I think that the truth is it's like logistics or value flows isn't all the economic activity in the business, but it is the core part of the business that that's one, the hardest to reason about, and two, has the most amount of variability in it. So it's one of the things that's like least studied in a way, because it gets into the things of like, well, you've got like 15 different like for example in manufacturing, I like to have at least 2 different manufacturers for every single like source input, and the reason being is that I like to be able to get more observability in my process if I can compare and contrast against one versus the other. But I can actually show that inside of a diagram, and I can show the benefits of that in a diagram. With otherwise, I'm just it's hard to use it with just pure numbers and pure analytics. But with graphs and graph flow, you can kind of show the relationships.
Yep. I think I would just add on to say it's more than logistics because it includes all of the production value flows. Yeah. And exchange, but that's another world sort of. But that's part of your logistics because you're sourcing from, already made resources.
Yeah, and there's probably a holistic system that's more than value flows and more than the Internet of Affections work, and everything else. That's basically like the everything model, which can model like all of life and the universe and everything in it. But you got to throw something.
Oh yeah, but too hard diversion. Yeah, picking the sweet spot of scope is difficult.
I have to jump for another meeting, but really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Sure. Thank
Okay.
you guys.
Bye.
Or I can stay on too, but yeah.
Yeah.
How's it going, Brent? You're in charge.
Well, I'm sort of thinking like, well, my notes sort of fell apart, but when I was going through your website, there's still things that I just I don't understand, but I don't know how to express how I don't understand them. So I might just need to dive into it more.
I think it's really helpful to do something instead of think about it too much. You know, like if you map it to your specific use case that you want to do, you know,
yeah, well,
and to go really crazy, you can code it,
I mean, my only strategy is to try to take your making pies example and try to use the ontology to describe it. So.
Yeah.
And so.
What do you want to do,
I actually
Brent?
have a question.
What do you want to do? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This kind of ties, like, it kind of brought up a question I've been sitting on for a while from the beginning of the conversation, which is like something I'm interested in. It relates to the pie thing too, which is like the foundation of the process, which is like the farmers, right? And like the physical location of farming and the value of real estate in whatever conceptual sense we've placed on that too, you know? And so, like, I'll give you an example, right? I live in San Diego County, and so there's property taxes, and it's gotten to the point where the property taxes have exceeded the value of food production. So, where there used to be a bunch of farmers, there's like a whole valley that used to be farmers and all this stuff, and it's starting to become like, you know, like real
estate developers and
yeah, because it's more profitable than like the food, which is ironic because we need the food to live, but like so anyways, I guess I'm wondering if there's a way to like I'm wondering if there's a way to create a value flows map of what already is existing in society so we can figure out like maybe things are being undervalued by money, you know, that actually have more intrinsic value, like food. Like the apples needed to bake a pie, and you know, once you don't have anywhere to grow the apples, you know, now the price of a pie starts to go up because of the scarcity of apples, you know, and then like there's all these chained together like effects, you know, that are kind of unmeasured right now, you know.
Yeah.
And then that leads into my second question, which is the measurement, because you know, it's not just about quantity, right? It's about quality and weight and all of these, like basically the whole entire scientific process of like what is an official observation, right? Like so yeah, I guess I don't know how to formulate that into a question, but how can that be implemented, I guess?
Yeah. I'm going to try to sort of answer it. Because value flows, the term observation is too broad, really, because exactly what you're talking about, like scientific observations, say, or any kind of quantitative that isn't part of a flow. It's a point. It's a point. That's not really in value flows. And I think the term observation is confusing everybody. If you have 2 points that are the same measurement of, you know, of something that's changed over time, you can make that into a flow. You know, like I measured my CO2 yesterday in this soil, and I measured it today, and now I have between 2 points, I can tell how much CO2 was maybe sequestered into that soil or something.
Right.
Lost, whichever. And now that's a resource flow.
Right.
But the points of observational data aren't. They're just out of scope, but connected, but that's where you got to put your ontologies together. And when we were working with some people that were doing climate accounting stuff and teaching, and so then we did a bunch of thinking about that and found an ontology. It's called SOSA that does that kind of observation, and figured out how it would intersect. So I know it's doable, but we haven't done it because that project fell apart. We don't do much if we don't have an actual project with actual users and stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd basically make your environment your agent, and you'd assign your different populations as also as agents of change inside of your environment. Then you take your measurables that you can come up with, and that'll at least give you ways that you'll basically have your observables and your agents, and you can then work between the two of them to see how they interact with each other, and maybe build up your ontology that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. That wasn't your whole question, though, but that was part of it.
Well, no, that addressed the measurement part, right? So
yeah. So what was the first part? Remind me, because
relating. Okay, so I guess I was wondering, like, how far down the chain of value can you?
Yeah, property taxes and apples and yeah.
Right, because it's like you need an apple for the pie, but then there's the space and time to grow it.
You can go as far back as you can record data.
Okay.
You can go as far back as you know.
Okay.
And you can put any kind of inputs. If you're looking at some piece of property, a piece of land, well, okay, and you had to pay taxes, like all of that stuff can get accounted for. And you can see they're connected because of the very lovely input, process, output, directed graph chains, So yeah, you can go way back. You can go back and say, okay, what do they pay their workers on this farm?
Yeah.
Right.
Did they throw out X and pollute the river? They said they're organic, but look at this input. That's not organic. So if you have that information, or the people that recorded that information are willing to share it, you can go as far back as you can go.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is that you're going to have incomplete graphs, because you may have incomplete graphs that may have relations between each other, but you may not have a good grasp of how they interact. Like, for example, if you did a complete graph, it would be like the value of safety and security in a civilization where we have when you don't have to be when you have a recompensation for theft and you have insurance for property loss, versus and what is the value of that? It's like, well, I don't know. How do you?
Right.
But what this allow you to do is allow you to reason on these intrinsics that are difficult to reason about by at least giving a relational between this value proposition and that value proposition. And then you can make broad spectrum observations, like this value proposition is worth X number of $1 billion a year in economic input, and this value proposition has this value, this $1 billion of economic cost to mitigate. And you can at least say, well, because they're interrelated because of these things that they have, if we reduce this harm, then we could reduce this cost of remediation. And remediation of things like health care,
right,
water,
tons of stuff, right, that we don't currently connect.
Right.
Yep, very true. But you're right about incomplete graphs. They're everywhere, and they're even more. And they always will be, I guess, but they're even more so now because every company has its black box, and you aren't going to see it. So there's that.
Do you think? Sorry, I wonder if using value flows or thinking about things through the lens of value flows would allow you to observe the inputs and outputs of a black box and be able to like extrapolate what's going on inside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some extent, sure. And also, sometimes you want to look at it at that level of data. You know, if you're doing like regional planning and you want something that's this big to look at, and you want 12 bubbles and no more, because that's how many like you can pull all that up to the levels you want to use and to look at. And a lot of those models have black boxes in them, but it doesn't matter because you can see what comes in and what goes out, and that's all you need for that sort of.
Right.
One important concept that you just mentioned that it needs to be highlighted is that the idea that a box seeing something and being able to put a boundary layer between what goes in and what goes out. That happens in physics or in like in heat transfer. That happens in programming data in and out. But it also happens when you talk about like creating an abstract like structure. Like if you can boundary layer the inputs and the outputs, you can abstract out the inner workings as long as the inputs and outputs are observable.
Yep. True. Yep.
So I'm probably gonna have to get going as well. But Lynn, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. I love this conversation. I think I learned a lot, and I hope that I contributed as well.
Yes, yeah, you guys have great questions.
Yeah, and Brent, if you want help with stuff, I've got like a whole pile of projecty stuff to work on. If you want to like make value flows for like user groups or for small businesses, I probably would give you some help with that as well. So hit me up.
So nice.
Give a yell if you have any questions.
Will do.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Sam.
Bye. Catch you later.
Yeah.